and sleep is just not a part of my life right now. So, 2:30 has been wake up for the last 2 mornings, and so anyway, this is about the time that I feel like I should be going to bed. So anyway, good to be with you guys. I'm going to start and just kind of tell you a little of my journey into missions. I went to Biola University, wanted to be a youth pastor, was I think probably my junior year, and a missionary speaker came and spoke, and my heart was just captivated with the need around the world and feeling like I could be a part of that. And so I kind of thought I'd spend the rest of my life being a youth worker in missions. My senior year of college, when everybody asked, the big question, what are you going to do when you graduate? I said, I'll be any place except the United States. And I said it over and over and over and over again. And then God was not opening any doors. I was kind of looking for, some great divine revelation. And then spring break, I went out, and this guy who had discipled me my junior year had become a senior pastor at a church in Palos Verdes down in LA, about 40 minutes from Biola. And I went out there to hang out with him, and he said, dream with me. What are your dreams? I said, oh man, I want to go serve God somewhere. I don't know where, and kind of what I want to do. And then eventually I want to come back. And I didn't tell him this, but I wanted to work with him in his church and do youth ministry after being on the mission field for a couple of years. So anyway, fast forward, got all done telling him my dreams. And then he said, well, now dream with me. He said, I want you to come when you graduate in a couple of months and be my high school youth pastor. And I was like, oh my gosh, I thought I'd have to be 2 years down the road before that part of the vision came. And he said, what do you think? And I was like, Gordon, I've just told everyone I know that I'll be any place except the United States. And now I'm going to be 40 minutes away. It's like, I got to pray about it. And I got in the car, and before I pulled out to go back to Biola, I was laughing my head off because I knew that God had trumped my plan, And if you ever, realize God's got something, and he hadn't been making it clear. So I just thought, well, I'll spend some time at Rolling Hills. I ended up taking every month the high school group down to Mexico. And Palos Verdes, if you don't know that area, is per capita, Palos Verdes and Rolling Hills estates are 2 of the wealthiest cities in the world. And so I go from wanting to be anywhere in the United States to these just super rich families. And I thought, what do these kids need? They need to be exposed to the real needs of the world. So every month I'd take a group down to Mexico. And we started working in the Tijuana dump, and then we started doing development. And then I kept thinking, when's God going to send me? Because I wanted to go. And I was there year after year after year. And I thought, well, maybe I'll meet somebody, and then I'll go. And so everybody was trying to fix me up. I was 22 when I became the youth pastor. It was a big church, and so, people are always, oh, you got to meet my granddaughter. She'd be perfect for you. I'm like, lady, she's 12. Give me a break. And then so my roommate comes walking out one day and said, oh, Grace is coming down. Grace was actually one of my high school students who had come up here and was going to City College, and he said, yeah, she's bringing some girl. And I was like, oh man, I hate being fixed up. And I went and took a shower anyway, because you never know. And it was a good thing, because she brought my wife over. And so my wife, the first time we talked, she was working at what is now Santa Barbara Community Church, used to be Trinity Baptist, as the college director. I came up here, we went down and sat by the Biltmore on the break wall, and she told me her story. And she said what I had been saying to girls for years: I don't ever want to own a home, I don't need to have kids to be happy, and I don't want to live in the United States. So she said those 3 things to me that I'd been chasing girls off with those statements for years. And she thought she broke my heart and chased me off, but I didn't respond, because I was like, what am I going to say? Oh, me too, So anyway, I just left it there. And then driving home that night, I stopped on the way to Ventura, where the rocks are there along the ocean, and went, I found my wife. And so I thought, this is it. God's going to send us to the mission field. So we get married. 5 weeks later, we're pregnant. God's sense of humor again. Neither one of us cared if we have kids, so all of a sudden we're pregnant. We had gone with the team to Poland, 20 high schoolers, and right when communism was ending, we're there when they're pulling the statues of Stalin down in the city square of Gdansk. It was just this amazing thing, and we thought, we're going to go to the Eastern Bloc, we're going to Russia. So we named our first kid Tasha, thinking that then God's got to send us to Russia, right? We named our kid Tasha, we have to go to Russia. Go to Urbana, where they're just looking for people with a pulse, 20,000 college students and us, and we're in our later 20s at this point, and put our names in. They have no reason to reject us. No one calls us back. And we're thinking, what in the world? We just want to go serve God. And God then, I'd gone up for Thanksgiving to my family in Oregon, and my dad said, I'm praying for you every day until you know. And the craziest thing, here we are wanting to go to Russia, and God calls us to Santa Barbara. And so I would ask people, I became a senior pastor, which was the last thing I wanted to be. That was on my list of ministry things that I would want to be. Senior pastor was literally the bottom of my list. And I get called to be a senior pastor in this church in Santa Barbara, and my friends were like, dude, how do you get a church in Santa Barbara? And I was like, it's easy. You aim for Russia. God gives you Santa Barbara, So anyway, we're here for 11 years. And the whole time open to where God might send us, open to what God might have us do. And then the AIDS pandemic broke loose. We read in Time magazine in 2001 about the AIDS pandemic, and it just broke both of our hearts. And we thought, maybe there's something we can do, either get our church tied in or maybe we can go. And so 2003, 11 years ago tonight, we were boarding our flight at LAX for South Africa with David Moore, Pastor David Moore from New Covenant Church here in town. A couple of college students from our church, our kids who were 3, 5, and 7, and a friend of ours who's a missionary nurse, and that put us boarding our flight in Atlanta on September 11, 2001, right when everything went down in New York. And so all the airports in the nation get shut down. Here we are on our way to South Africa, wanting to go help with the AIDS pandemic, and we're stuck now in Atlanta, thinking, do we go? Do we come back? Does the church need us to be here? We called the elders of the church, and they said, man, if God opens the door, just keep going. And so on September 13th, they opened some airports in the nation for 4 hours, and one plane left the United States. The first plane that left the U.S. was the plane that we were on to South Africa on the 13th. And we got over there, and when we got there, we were just overwhelmed by the sea of need. We went to help with AIDS, and at the time, in a nation of 43 million people, South Africa had 5.3 million people who had AIDS. And more than any nation in the world. Still, a nation of 52 million, they've got more people with AIDS than any country. They have more people than India, which has 1.2 billion people. It's completely illogical, and yet, for many reasons, it was the perfect storm for the AIDS pandemic to just kind of go wild. Well, we got over there, and the crazy thing was, we went just to learn, and everywhere we went and we asked people, AIDS was not on anybody's top 5 list of needs. People are dying every day. People died, right after we left one day, this woman died who we'd been visiting, but it's not on their top 5 needs. And what we were overwhelmed with was just the poverty that was everywhere, and the unemployment was 87% in the first community that we visited. And we thought, how do you address a need in a community that is lost in a sea of other needs? And we honestly had no answer. We came back more confused than we'd ever been, and just started asking everybody we could find, how would you deal with this? How would you deal with this? How would you deal with this? And so I was doing a wedding. Some Westmont students were getting married. We went down, we're on State Street at a wedding rehearsal dinner. I turned to the guy next to me who was missionary and about to leave for the mission field. And I said, where are you going? And he said, if I told you, I'd have to kill you. It's a closed country. And so I was like, all right, well, we're not going to talk about your thing. So I told him about our thing and said, how would you deal with this? And he goes, I don't really know. But he said, it's so weird that you would ask me that. Because he said, people doing development, it's been in rural settings, there's a lot of good models of development, but it has not really worked in an urban setting. And he said, I just heard about a woman who was a Kenyan doctor, and she got trained in rural community development, and she went up to Addis Ababa. She was going to go out into the rural areas of Ethiopia. She was so overwhelmed with the needs in the slums of Addis that she took what she learned and applied it there. And he said, it's the first person who I've heard of who has a really effective community development, empowerment-oriented ministry in an urban setting, and her name is Florence Muindi. So we're thinking, great, how are we ever going to meet Florence Muindi? How are we ever going to meet this woman who's successful and learn from her so that we could possibly use it in South Africa? Well, fast forward, there were some missionaries that were connected to Calvary Chapel, Santa Barbara, who we didn't know from anybody, but somebody told us, hey, they're coming back from Tanzania, the Russells are going to be in town. We grabbed them, had them over to our house for dinner, sitting there with Peter and Tammy Russell. How would you guys address this? They said, we don't really know. We work in a rural setting. They said, but it's really weird that you would ask us that. Because they were students at Fuller in Pasadena, and they said, this woman just moved into our apartment next door to us in Pasadena, And she's this Kenyan doctor who's working in Ethiopia. And my wife looks at them and said, "Is her name Florence?" And Peter goes, "How do you know that?" We said, "Because our God is a very big God." And the next thing you know, Florence and Festus Mundi are sitting in our house in Goleta teaching us this model of development. And they, what they shared with us, we realized this could work. This turns the whole picture of what we had kind of known about missions upside down and gives the transformational principles to the people, not to the outsider coming in. And so rather than the outside expert having all the answers, this is empowering the people in the community to come up with their own answers. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you about today, is this model of community development. It's called CHE, C-H-E, Community Health Evangelism. And the way we're going to talk about this, I actually need 3 volunteers. 1, 2, 3. You guys are going to come with me. We're going to go down to the high school room. You guys are going to give us about 3 minutes, 4 minutes, and then everybody else come on down. Okay? And this is a CHE lesson. So I'm going to teach you guys about CHE. What you're going to see today is an actual CHE lesson in action. All right? So you 3 come on down. Okay. Troy, you can bring everybody else in. Okay, so we're in the midst of the river. Act 1. Take it away.
Hey, let's go to Disneyland.
Okay.
Oh no, there's this big scary river with all this paper with snakes on it.
Nah, I can't swim.
Oh, I can't swim either. This is scary. Maybe not.
Maybe not. Maybe we shouldn't go to Disneyland.
Hey guys, what are you guys trying to do? We're going to Disneyland. It's across the river.
But I can't swim.
Neither can I. Lame. Well, how about I carry you? I can piggyback you, right? I've been doing this like every day. Like today I did it 3 times. I can totally get you across the river. That sounds awesome. Jump on there. Oh, Jesus. Oh, what did you eat, bro? Oh, my Taco Bell. Oh, okay. Okay, kidding. Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. Oh, it's like raising an elephant, baby. Okay. I'm sorry, man. Whew. I'm sorry.
Wait,
We'll both take 5.
Wait, can I get a piggyback ride?
No. I'm sorry. I mean, I don't know what Kenny ate. You were hanging around, so you probably ate Taco Bell too. Supreme burrito. I can't carry you. I'm sorry. Whew. But you know what? I can teach you how to get across.
Okay.
Come on. So you're gonna go on this rock. You're gonna go on this rock. You're gonna go on this rock. You're going on this rock. This rock. And this rock.
Yay!
You made it.
All right, that's the end of Act 1. Let's give them a round. Hey, really, we want to go to Disneyland. How is that going to help? Can you weave a basket across? Anyway, but that's sometimes what we do in missions. We come into a situation, and that's actually with us. We wanted to come and help with the AIDS pandemic because people are dying of AIDS. As an outsider, man, what greater need could there be than to try to help? At that time, 5.3 million people with AIDS, 50,000 people on antiretrovirals. People were dying like crazy. So the outsider was, we got to do something about AIDS, stopping, AIDS and all this. The insider was, I can't feed my children. My kid's gone to school 2 days in a row and hasn't eaten. I need a job. I'm unemployed. What are you going to do to help me take care of my family? Because I'm not that concerned about a disease that might kill me in 6 months. And so we just were we had to die to our idea of what the needs of the community were in order to empower the people in the community to meet the needs that they had. So felt needs is another one of our buzz phrases. You have to find the felt need of a community, empower the people within the community to bring about the change. So this drama, we do this drama all over the world. When we went to Swaziland, a guy heard about what was happening in South Africa in this urban slum. We're in the middle of a 3 million person urban slum. We started in a community called Philippi. We went in there, and I'll tell you more of the story later, but we went in and started bringing about change. This guy heard about what was happening there, and he'd been going up and doing relief, doing all this stuff for people in Swaziland. And relief creates dependence, relief creates all sorts of dissatisfaction, it creates entitlement, it creates all sorts of things in people. It gets ugly and yuck. And so anyway, he heard about empowerment that was happening, and he said, will you guys come to Swaziland? So we go up to Swaziland. There's supposed to be 25 people. We end up with 50 people in the community, crowd into this room. We do the river crossing, and then my wife starts to debrief the river crossing with this group of people. In Africa, people always say it's the women that do all the work in Africa. It's the women that are going to be the change agents in Africa. So I'm in the back and I'm watching the men. And the men, the women are all sitting up there and the men are standing in the back and their arms are crossed. And they're just like, yeah, another white person from the other side of the world is going to come over here and tell us what to do. And Susan, the first thing out of her mouth is, we just want you guys to know, we don't have the answers for your community. You are the experts in your community. You are the ones who know what needs to happen. All we can offer you is tools to help you accomplish your vision for the community. And I'm watching these guys, and it's like these guys are back there, and all of a sudden, like, their heads are tilting, and they're like, I've never heard this before. And then she keeps going and talks about, how, the only thing we would have to offer is training and this, that, and the other, and all of a sudden the arms aren't crossed anymore, and then people start asking questions, and we saw this community that had been inundated with relief. And they started telling their stories. They started, we asked them, what kind of examples do you have? And they were like, well, these people come in and they bring us food. They have this feeding program, and they said they bring us food. And they said, that's great, but then it always ends. You can only bring food for so long. And they said, and then we're stuck, and our kids are dependent now upon this food, and we didn't work because they were doing it for us. And now we can't feed our kids. We're worse off than we were before. Every feeding program, if it's not taking care of an emergency need, is creating dependence. You do not want to make people dependent on an outsider. You want to empower people to bring about their own change. Now, another thing, what did they need to accomplish the river crossing? What? Knowledge, yeah. What did they use to get across? The rocks, yeah. So these are local resources. You don't want it to be dependent upon outside resource. Development uses local resource to bring about change because you want the people to be able to continue to do it. One of the litmus tests for the success of community development, Susan and I would ask each other almost, for a while it was like every time we drove into Philippi, we would say, what if we got hit by a bus today? In South Africa, it's a very real possibility. Every day could be your last, It's like we go into these places, gang, ridden community. 7 months in, our family got robbed at gunpoint. My son's Santa Barbara Scholarship Foundation scholarship that he applied for started with the words, "I'll never forget the day that the gun was pointed at my head." He was a student at San Marcos High School, and his brilliant, 4.8 friends and all that didn't get called by the Santa Barbara Scholarship Foundation as quickly as Elijah did. And his friends were like, how come you've got the first interview? And the guy sits down with Elijah and goes, I have never read in all of my years somebody's application, with a story like that. He just wanted to find out who is this kid who had this story. But anyway, our kids all had guns pointed at their heads, which wasn't funny. It was awful. But we would ask ourselves the question, if we got hit by a bus today, would what we are doing continue on? And if not, we should not be doing it. We should not be doing it. It's actually, hopefully I'll be able to tell you some of what we've done and what we're doing now, but part of what we're really working hard right now is to create complete in-country long-term sustainability in South Africa and in Ethiopia through creating this model of development. So, okay, any other thoughts about the river crossing? Let's give applause to our actors. Well done. And let's put all of our props away and we'll go back to the room to talk about the difference between relief and development. And so relief being what we do for others, development being empowering others to bring about change. So to do this, we're going to count off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All right, by threes. So 1, 2,
3, 4.
No,
1,
I'm sorry.
2,
3, 4.
1,
1.
2, 3. You guys are just like my Ethiopians. They could never. They always went to the next number. So anyway, you can feel good. This is Ethiopian master's level students, but counting off was the biggest debacle of. And this was after like 4 or 5 classes. They still had a struggle with that. So anyway, all right. So 1s, you're going to be over here. 2s, 3s. Yeah, no, it means you're Ethiopian, man. All right, so 1's over here, 2's there, 3's down here. And what you're going to do in your groups is you're going to go through and let's do this. I'm going to have group 1, you're going to do relief. Groups 2 and 3, you're going to do development. Okay, so pressure's on group 1. You guys are going to do relief. When do you do relief? When is the appropriate time to do relief? When is the appropriate time to do development? So you two development groups. Who does it, ideally? Who does relief? What does it foster? So you've got, we missing? You were a 1.
I thought I was a 3.
Were you a 3?
You're a 1, Isaac.
3?
You're a 1.
Oh my God.
You're a 1.
You're a 1. You're a 4, right? You said 4.
Yeah. That's right. That's what I thought. Yeah, you're a 4. Yeah. Okay, so when do you do it? Who does it? What does it foster? Is there behavior change? And if so, what would the potential behavior change be? What's the ideal duration? How long does it last? Where do the resources most likely come from? And where is the ownership of the project? All right, so 1's, you're going to do relief. 2's and 3's, you're going to do development. Go for it. And let me know if you have any questions.
About what?
About, okay, so relief is doing stuff for others. It's the outsider coming in and doing it for others. Development is empowering the people in the community to do it. So you guys are going to do development. When do you do development? Who ideally does it? What does it foster? What kind of behavior change? What should be the duration? Where do the resources come from? And where's the ownership? And you guys are going to do relief. Okay?
When to do relief?
Yeah.
Empowering the people.
When there's
Well,
problems,
does he want us to answer, when do we
or when
empower
someone needs
people?
relief,
When there's a need, who
when
needs
someone
people to do it, what it fosters.
So like what kind of situations for relief? Like,
when someone needs it.
yeah, so emergencies, floods, crises, yeah.
What you're saying is right. Me too.
I was thinking like,
When to do it? When
cause like,
there's a need?
relief be appropriate, it's like when someone's like just kind of down on their luck, you know, it's not a normal situation, so when it's like super rooted into the community, that's not good.
What he said in there, want the people to do it.
Okay, so.
What was your term you used for listening to the people and their needs?
The felt.
Felt needs, yeah. Yeah.
They're building a whole new.
Like you missionary student?
What'd you guys do?
Their ability to move.
Well, that word was like when you went. Yeah, right. Everything's translation.
Sustainability, like a long term, instead of temporary. Behavior change?
They don't need to depend on what that would give them confidence in behavior change. Would that be confident?
Well, they're not, like you said, remember.
What does it result? Like what does it create or result in? Yeah, what does it foster? What does it create?
Reliance on.
Confidence in being able to provide for themselves.
Yeah.
Solution to the needs, right?
Dependence.
What
Good.
Foster was
And
accomplish. Well, that's I
Duration
think
should be
the duration.
long after you're gone.
Yeah, what does fosters mean?
Like what does it result in?
Okay.
Playing the lead, I was good at that.
So it results in the community being stronger.
Yeah, I felt like a solution to the problem. Yeah.
It's like boundary.
relief is like
It's like instead of like
Come
maybe one
from
person
that
gets
like-
like a short little boost for a little while, a short like it has the power to take a third world country internationally. You know what I'm saying? Like changes the environment. Like for instance, the situation.
A natural climate
Term
impact.
problem is short term.
and they need help. And they
Need power.
Oh, yeah, because it's the
Need power.
but it does depend on like,
I do.
so that, yeah,
Like foods.
yeah.
Yeah, the foods could be like a relief to something like if you're hungry.
Okay, but it's more
through their dependence, they can be irritable, I guess. And maybe so more needs and
Like rocks. It creates.
so what's the
It creates.
behavior?
What's it called? Like
Maybe.
commerce. Commerce. Like short term. Because if you go and feed them, you rob them, like say you bring somebody rice, the rice farmers there don't have enough to sell their crops and make money. Yeah. Well, no. Resource just comes from
You guys done?
development.
All right, 1 minute. Who wants to be the scribe?
Donors, yeah.
All right, come on up.
Jesus saved harsh words for those guys.
So in Che training,
What's that?
we won't have time to get into all this, but
Ownership.
if you're doing Che training, you always sit at the same level. So the leader is not going to stand, and you have different people who get up and write and scribe. And normally you do it on sheets of paper so that you could, like, we would do this on a sheet of paper and then we'd go tape it on the wall. And it's really cool, like in an impoverished place, when the answers are coming from the group and people who feel like nobody really listens to them, nobody really cares what they think, and all of a sudden their answers are going on the board and people are going, wow, yeah, that's a good idea. And then they get taped on the wall, and it's like, for people who have not viewed themselves as agents of change in their own community, all of a sudden they get really excited that it's their ideas that are going to lead to this change. And so at the end of our trainings, a lot of times the people ask, can we take those sheets? And we'll go visit and do home visits in people's homes, and these sheets are along people's walls, and they'll have them like photos or wallpaper for years to come, because they now view themselves as the people who can bring about making a difference. So, okay, group 1. When do you do relief?
Like emergency, floods, crisis.
Good. So yeah, in some sort of a crisis situation, emergency, flood, good answer. Group 2, development.
When there's a need.
When there's a need. That's okay. Spelling doesn't count. Don't worry about it. When there's a need. Group 3, any other thoughts on that?
After you assess the felt needs.
Okay, after assessing felt needs. Good. All right. And development can just be any time. Basically everybody always needs to develop and grow. Group 1, relief. Who does relief?
What would you say?
Who does relief?
The missionary organizations or outside organizations.
Okay, so the outsider,
Anyone with like a desire.
yeah. So it can be missionaries, it can be outsiders, Red Cross, yeah. Group 3, who does development?
The locals.
Yeah,
Jesus.
locals,
True.
Jesus.
The Holy Spirit.
That's right. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that, group 2?
We put us, like the missionaries, we give the tools to them.
Yeah.
So we help them out.
Yeah, so it's a partnership between the outsider and the insider to do development.
Yeah, we facilitate so that.
Ooh, good word. Facilitate. We use that term a lot. So like our community development projects assess the felt needs, and then that has led to orphan support groups. There's about 2 million orphans in South Africa. Every community is just filled with orphans, and so they start these support groups. The people who come and volunteer in those groups, they will call either facilitators, or they'll call them, and actually that's mostly what they tend to call them in our programs, because they want them to view themselves as those that are helping others.
CRISIS.
Yeah.
Perfect.
It's really bothering me.
Okay,
I was supposed to.
what does relief foster?
Dependence on the organization.
Dependence. Relief, if it doesn't end at the right time, will create dependence. Group 2, development.
It fosters their ability to meet the need.
Yeah.
Sustainability.
So sustainability, buzzword.
A solution to their immediate problems.
Yeah. So solution, empowerment, sustainability. Good. You guys are brilliant. Group 1. Behavior change.
One that we had to really think about.
Oh, well, like, I guess they would just become more needy.
It can, yeah.
Before.
Yeah, so there's not necessarily a real change in behavior, but possibly it could go bad, right? Where they become needy. Yeah, enabled, needy. Good. Not good. Bad. Development, group 3.
Independence.
Independence, yeah.
Community independence.
Good.
Hope.
Hope, yeah. Anything else, group 2?
We put confidence.
Confidence, yeah. Yeah, we have seen that in a huge way. We have people who, old grannies, who'd come to these trainings, who were just counting down the days of their lives kind of a thing, who now view themselves as world changers because they were given the tools to bring about change. We had in our first group of Chays, I don't think we knew anybody who was HIV positive that was in our training, but our people, what happens when they do Chay training is they come each week and they get 2 lessons. They get a physical lesson and a spiritual lesson. So every week they get physical and spiritual. And then after about a month of the training, they start going out to the community and sharing it with 10 homes apiece. So you've got 25 people who are going out into the community sharing with 10 homes each. That's 250 homes. Average home, actually super conservatively, would be 5 people. You have 1,250 people who are being impacted by this training every session. So you've got a little granny who starts going door to door, meeting felt needs in her community, and man, all of a sudden they start viewing themselves as these change agents. They started visiting people who were HIV positive because that was one of the felt needs that came up. We started teaching people about AIDS. In 2003, when we moved over there's very little training about AIDS. People thought you'd get AIDS by touching someone with AIDS or by sharing a glass that they drank out of. And so we started teaching them about that, and people with AIDS would get banished. They'd build a separate shack for them about the size of a bed behind a shack, and that's where that person would live. And some of our Chays would go out to those people, and it's hot, and they'd be all covered with ants, and they'd have sores all over their body. And our Chays would go out and wash them and hug them and care for them. And all of a sudden, it just, like, those people started seeing themselves differently. And then, when we did our second round of Chay training, about half of our 25 people were HIV positive. People who had viewed themselves as the scum of the earth, as the refuse of that community, wanted this training because they wanted others to start viewing themselves like they had begun to view themselves because of the Chays that had come to them. It was awesome. It was just like world altering to begin to see this happen, and I'll tell you more stories later. Yeah, they got empowered. They were given empowerment, and then they wanted then to pass that on to others. How long should relief last, ideally?
Short time.
Short. As short as possible. When we took our training, it was here in Goleta. These guys came as a doctor from Zimbabwe. This guy spent 25 years as a medical doctor, missionary doctor in Zimbabwe. American guys from Fresno. Yeah. He said during our training, if I had it to do all over again, I would not have gone and been a medical doctor, because he said, I saw the same people over and over and over and over again, treating them for the same things over and over and over again. I would have done development and empowered them so that they would be prevented from disease rather than me treating it over and over and over again. And the thing that they drilled into us was, relief is the executioner of development. And they just drilled that into us, so much so that we got to the urban slum, and man, we're trying as hard as we could not to do relief, but we would start our committee meetings. We'd have 10 people, about this size group, and we'd be sitting around in a circle, and we'd throw out a discussion question to get people talking before the training would begin. And invariably, somebody in that group would say, we'd ask a question like, what's your most memorable moment from last week or something? And then somebody would say, my kid hasn't eaten in 3 days, and I went to my neighbors and nobody's got food. And, and we're sitting there going, oh my gosh, like, how can they learn about development if they're sitting here starving and their kids are starving, and we started realizing we got to do something to help. So we started doing a little bit of relief, like we'd give food to the committee when they would come so they'd be able to focus on learning about development. So this guy came over, who was going to be our coach eventually, but anyway, this guy came over to meet with us from the group that had taught us this, and my wife didn't even want to go to the meeting. She's like, we're doing it wrong, man, we're doing relief. And we went and sat down with Gil Odendahl. He's now the vice president of development for the organization World Relief. And I told Gil, I'm like, dude, we're doing some relief, man, and this is why. And Gil said, in the urban setting, he said, you have to do some relief. And I said, oh, thank you, because we feel so bad. Like, it's the executioner of development. He goes, no. In an urban setting, he said, you've got to meet some basic needs. He said, it's either going to be the executioner or relief could become the midwife to development.
Wow.
And we were like, ooh. I said, so what's the difference? When does it cross over from the executioner to the midwife? And he goes, you're going to have to figure that out for yourself. And I was like, oh, darn it. But that's where we realized you've got to do some relief in an urban setting because people are dying and starving and don't have ARVs and this kind of stuff. You got to do some, but the key is as short a time as possible. Or you're going to create dependence, you're going to create entitlement, and we've made some classic awful mistakes along the way of entitlement and all that.
So just a quick question. When you said that you asked him that and he pointed out to you, you have to figure it out, what are some of the areas that you start figuring out? Like when it does become enablement, or when relief answers it's a temporary solution to a longer, bigger problem.
Yeah.
How do you know when, in the sense of like, okay, I'm feeding them, I got their kids, there's some food here, there's some help. How do you know when that should stop? Do you create as you're going to still help with relief, and then in the middle of that dynamic trying to create the CHE, the change, right?
Yeah, and that's where their answer, as short a time as possible, you have to constantly be asking, should this continue? Can they now do this for themselves? Or could they have done something for themselves that we've been doing for them? So one of our examples, people had to have food to take their ARVs. One of the things, not a big, antiretroviral drugs. So the things that will slow down the impact of the AIDS virus. And again, when we moved over there, 5.3 million people with AIDS, there were no stories like Magic Johnson, who's had AIDS since the 80s or whatever. It's like there was nobody living long that we knew of with AIDS. Everybody was dying because they didn't have the antiretroviral drugs. Well, I don't know, politically, I don't care where you stand. One of the greatest things that America did in South Africa came from George Bush. George Bush rolled out a thing called PEPFAR, which was the President's Emergency Plan for HIV and AIDS. They got to sub-Saharan Africa ARVs for 2 million people. We have kids now. We now run, and one of the things that grew out of our development was an orphan boarding high school. There's a little girl named Sinikolo who is alive today because America gave ARVs to South Africa. I mean, we've got people that we know that are here today because of that plan, that program that our government rolled out that, again, I hardly know anybody over here that even knew it existed, and yet it saved so many lives. So anyway, the ARVs started coming in. Well, you can't take ARVs if you don't have food. And so we started distributing food parcels to the HIV support group. So here's when we knew relief had gone on too long. We're giving out food parcels one day, and our staff is like, man, people are all ticked off. And we're like, well, why are they ticked off? And they said, because the rice that we have in these food parcels isn't tastic rice. And we're like, what? And they said, the tastic rice is the good rice, and that's been in the previous food parcels, and this food parcel has a different kind of rice. And at that point, we're like, oh, okay, this has gone on too long, man. We've reached the stage of entitlement. We've reached the stage where it's the wrong kind of rice. And so we just let people know, the food parcels will end at the end of this year. And the great thing was, then they started coming up with their own solutions. It actually probably never should have started. We should have helped them come up with ways to provide their own food rather than just giving them the food, but we weren't there yet. We weren't ready for that. So you just start learning. You don't want to create dependence. You want to empower. And every time you create dependence, you pay a high price. Every time you're doing for someone what they could do for themselves, it ends up being costly to you. It might be emotionally costly, it might be physically costly, but you want to always be giving people tools, not doing for them if they can do it for themselves. Development, duration. Either group. Long time.
Long term.
Yeah.
Long after we're gone, it should still be
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah, it's kind of really, development should happen in all of our lives forever. You guys are right now learning, empowering, you're learning things. You're being developed through what you're doing right now in, Calvary Chapel Bible College. You're getting tools that you'll be able to use to make an impact in other people's lives. You should never stop learning. So development is long term. Where do the resources come from for relief? Donors, churches, yeah, outside. It's coming from somewhere out here into the community. Group 2, where do the resources come from for development? Locally, yeah. So you want, in as much as possible, and again, in the urban setting, it gets messy. As much as possible, you want to use local resource to give people the tools and to bring about the change that's there. Part of our difficulties this year is we've created some stuff over the years that have been really dependent upon the outside, and justified it in our own minds. Our orphan boarding high school that we run, there's a lot of entitlement. There's a lot of stuff we're sorting out right now that have made this year really difficult for us because we realized we're paying the price of some relief and trying to figure out how do we turn that around and can we turn that around and what will it look like to turn that around. Ownership, who owns it?
The organization?
Yeah, organization, outside.
Outside help.
Yeah. Who owns development? Group 3?
People.
Yeah, the people, the community.
Locals, community.
You guys are good. This is where you far, far excel beyond my Ethiopians. Thank you. Good job. Scribe.
It's because we just had lunch.
That's right. Those guys, I tell you, this last group, we've run 2 groups through this master's program in Ethiopia. And the first group, I thought was a challenge, but it was actually, in retrospect, it was just an absolute joy. The second group, they strategically pulled guys from all around the nation. And the thing that made it so tough was just people's English was so bad. And I, as you have picked up, start speaking quickly, and I had to slow down and enunciate really carefully. And still, I think, a lot of the guys were picking up about 30% of what was being communicated, and it was just so tough. And that's one of the liabilities, Yeah. Ich sprechen Sie Deutsch? Ich spreche. Anyway, I took 2 years, but if I had to learn in German, that's what I kept thinking. What if I had to be in school and learn in German? I would fail everything. There's no way. I could tell you how to get to the post office. There were certain things I learned that I will still say when I'm sure I'm an old man and senile. But yeah, no, I can't imagine being educated in a second language like these guys are. Okay. What time is it?
Yeah, let's take a break.
Is it time? Okay. How long?
You guys good? Just 10 minutes?
Wonderful.
All right.
All right.
Go ye into all the world.
All the snack rooms.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll take you on a little bit of a journey. So this is what this looked like for us. This training, the Che training, depends on who you get it from. It's between 3.5 usually and 5 days of training. After we went over and we identified the community and realized our need, we came back a second year, kind of assessed again, and then we went through this Che training that Florence and Festus told us about. And that was all the tools. At the end of a week of this training, you're given a disc, and the disc has thousands of lessons. I think back then it was 3,000 lessons. Now it's 7,000 lessons, dealing with everything you can imagine. So there are over 200 organizations that use Che around the world. And when they find a felt need, if you don't find a lesson on the disc, you can write your own lesson. There's a template on the disc, and you write your own lesson and you just mail it into what's now called the Global Che Network, and they'll incorporate it into the next disc and the next training. And eventually it's all going to be online and accessible, hopefully in the cloud. The lessons deal, again, every week you go in and you do a spiritual lesson and a physical lesson. The physical lessons you want to gear toward the felt needs in the community, the spiritual lessons as well, but you want to build a foundation with the spiritual lessons. You want to give people an understanding of who Christ is. You want to give people the tools that they need to know how to pray, to know how to study the Bible for themselves, to have, a relationship with God versus, just religion. And so some of those are kind of stock. And then the other ones, you want to meet people where they're at and cater to the felt needs. Because when we learn things that we want to learn, if you want to cross a river, you really pay attention and learn. If somebody comes up and teaches you basket weaving when you're trying to cross a river, which is what the American education system is built upon, we're the outsider. Who are the outsiders in the education system? The ones that are coming up with the solutions and everything. The teachers, the administration, and all that. The kids are like the community, but they're being told what they should learn. My kids all finished high school here in Santa Barbara. Especially my son would come home and be like, why in the world do I have to learn this stupid math? And I was like, because we all do. We all have to suffer through, And he's like, will I ever use this? And I was like, probably not. The main reason you're going to learn it is because, number one, you want to graduate, right? Yep. The second reason is because hopefully you're going to get a scholarship when you go to university. Beyond that, there's not a whole lot of felt need for this in your life because where you're headed probably isn't going to be a big issue. When you get out of school, you start learning things that you want to learn. And those things you completely internalize. I could not help my kids with their math homework because I did not give a rip about the stuff that they were learning, and I hadn't had it in so long, but it's not like I would go pull out my math books and study because I enjoyed it so much. It was like something I had to suffer through myself. Theology, I was passionate about. Man, I study theology. I talk about theology. All the time, because that's my passion. And so you want to meet people with the things that they're hungry for and they're passionate about, because then they'll keep those forever and they'll multiply those forever. Okay, so we went through this week of training. We realized at the time that we had to put Philippi, the community that we were working on the altar, because we didn't know if we'd kind of wrecked it with some of the relief we've already done. And one of the lessons that you learn when you go through the Che training is how to select the community that you should begin in. And you don't want to select a community that's going to be built with all this dependence and everything. You want to select a community that looks like it has the best potential to be empowered. And so we knew we'd be in that Philippi area. We didn't know for sure if we'd start with Philippi because we'd done a bunch of relief there and we didn't want to just be viewed as the outsider who's going to do it for them. But we knew if we did it in a community around there, eventually we'd make it back to Philippi. And long story short, Philippi ended up being hungry for development. So we were able to start there. Moved out there, started doing development, started trying to figure out what this would look like in an urban setting. Made a lot of mistakes, made a lot of,
Bad decisions.
and got set up a couple times. The robbery that I told you about where we were robbed at gunpoint was a setup. We started a bunch of projects and they wanted to start micro businesses because unemployment was the greatest felt need. So we started helping them start micro businesses. One of the guys who was on our very first Che committee was leading one of those businesses, and he attempted to rape 2 of the women in the project. So he got, that got called out. It got called to our attention. I assumed that the church that he was a part of had already been dealing with this in his life, and I was told that I needed to talk to him about stepping off our committee while this was being researched and all that, while the police did their thing. When I went to him, I was the first one that had ever confronted him with it. So I didn't know. I got kind of set up for this. And so anyway, I confront this guy and he was so mad. And he told the women that he was going to get me, and then we got robbed at gunpoint, and then the women dropped the charges. And this is kind of how Philippi justice works, is, somebody threatened someone and they knew if he would do that to me, he would kill them. And so they dropped the charges, and then all of a sudden this guy's scot-free. And then he wanted to be back on the committee. So then we've got this other quandary. So anyway, we had a lot of things, a lot of stuff that just, it was messy. God ended up taking us through that. We ended up having, the Che training happen. We ended up finding people who were just passionate about this stuff. They started projects that started bringing about change. Ocean Hills Covenant Church that meets in Santa Barbara Junior High was one of our first short-term teams. And short-term missions looks completely different when you're doing it development style. Rather than us coming in, like we had thought that Ocean Hills would come and do a VBS or something like that. Our committee said, our Che's are going out and they're finding all these orphans. There's a short-term team coming, right? And we said, yeah. And they said, could they run a camp for orphans? And we were like, I think so. So we called up John Ireland and said, John, would you be up for running a camp for these kids? And they're like, oh, we'd love to run an orphan camp. We were terrified, man. These kids, we asked what the range of ages was. It was age 4 to age 19. I'm thinking we're going to have gang members, who knows who's going to show up at this camp. And it ended up being the sweetest group of kids, like 50 kids, so sweet. And this one kid whose mom had just died, she was in one of our first micro businesses. We were out in a committee meeting in Philippi when we heard that she had died, and went over. She was still warm. To give you a little idea of what the urban slum is that we work in, they called the ambulance because she was dying at 12:30. We found out at 3. The ambulance didn't get there until 6:30 that night. So 6-hour response time for an ambulance. And a lot of times they just don't come at all. We tell our teams when they come over there, if something happens and someone needs to get medical treatment, just get them there. Yeah, get a taxi, do whatever you have to do, but you get them there. Don't ever think an emergency vehicle is going to come. The kid that was his mom who died, I talked to him and he didn't even know that she was HIV positive. She just told him that she had the flu because she didn't want him to be stigmatized. Kids whose parents die of AIDS all of a sudden get marked in the community. So the mom was trying to protect him. Sina Timba ended up coming on that camp. And just, these kids at the end of the week at camp were just crying, we need each other, we need each other. And we said, well, what if we get together? How many times? Let's get together 3 days a week. So we started this orphan support group, and it was started because these kids needed each other. And then that led to launching the orphan boarding high school, Bridges Academy. Sina Timba was in the first graduating class of Bridges Academy, and Sina Timba got a full ride to the University of Cape Town. University of Cape Town is one of the top universities in the world. It's the #1 university in the continent of Africa. Full stinking ride. We're talking everything paid. His lodging was paid. The classes were paid. The food was paid. It's this miracle. And now he this year started on staff with Bridges of Hope as one of the teachers at Bridges Academy. It's crazy to look back now and to see, I took him to this dinner. There was this organization that was starting, and they're doing job training. And they were talking about development, and I took him to this dinner about a year and a half ago. And I just took him because I wanted to hang out with him. He was finishing up at UCT, and I got invited to the dinner, but I wanted to hang out with him. So I went and picked him up and took him over there. And it just so happened that the question, they were asking questions of the people around the table, and then they'd go back and have a big group discussion, and they'd ask questions. And the question, when it was his turn to answer, the question was, how have you seen development be effective? And Sina Tim goes,
Underhand pitch.
I am development, he goes, I am the fruit of development, and the people are like, well, what do you mean? And he said, I was an orphan. I was out in the middle of the urban slum you guys are talking about. People came and gave me tools. People came and gave me training. And he goes, I am the fruit of what can happen when people are empowered. And anyway, such a great kid. In love now with a girl who we're really excited about, his last girlfriend. I was like, dude, all she wants is money, man, and that's unfortunately a lot of what they have to deal with. But anyway, he's got a girlfriend now who loves Jesus and just wants him to be a godly man and wants him to serve Christ. And anyway, it's very exciting. So Sina Timba, all these kids, they came. We started the school. We're now starting to see empowerment happen with them. This thing rippled out into the community. Like I said, there were all these people that were HIV positive. We started seeing this change Philippi. People started seeing the changes that were happening and started coming to us and saying, will you help us do this in other places? And so we started multiplying into other communities. And then some people who'd been doing relief, I mentioned before, up in Swaziland, heard about this. And they said, can you send, one of your people to Swaziland? And I said, well, if you mean our Americans, most of our Americans, their time was up. They were heading back over here. And Eric Anderson was there at the time. He's now the junior high pastor at Santa Barbara Community Church. And Jen Goebel, who's a counselor now here in town. The two of them had been doing Che training in the community that was being turned over then to all the locals. They were leaving, and we said, well, we don't have any Americans. But we said, what if we trained up 2 Swazis and 2 black South Africans, so people out of the urban slum? And they said, that'd be awesome. And so we took the people, did a week-long Che training, and then sent for 6 months 2 people out of Philippi up to Swaziland as missionaries. And first time anybody in the Che network knew of somebody from an urban slum who'd become a missionary to go replicate Che. And it worked. And now in Swaziland, they're fully in-country sustainable. They are in 14 communities in Swaziland. I told you about the guy standing with their arms folded. Well, the woman who kind of rose up in that scenario is just a rock star. I mean, she is just living this thing out and multiplying it into other people's lives. And they are seeing so many people come to Christ every year. And anyway, it's just been really cool. And then a couple from Santa Barbara who had come over with their kids on that very first team kept coming back. And then they met a woman here in town named Saba from Ethiopia, and they started going to Ethiopia. And they called us up and said, would you come to Ethiopia? And they said, we've kind of made a relief mess. Will you guys come dig us out and help us transition it into development? And we said, there's a lot of people that do Che in Ethiopia. Why don't we just hook you up with them? And he said, well, do they do Che with the Orthodox? And when we went up in 2004 and got to see Festus and Florence firsthand and heard about Ethiopia. Ethiopia has about 80 million people. 50 million of the 80 million are Orthodox. The Orthodox are listed in the Voice of the Martyrs Guide as persecutors of the Protestant church. And when we were there in 2004, we were hanging with the Protestants, and they were terrified of the Orthodox and told stories of churches being burned down and pastors being murdered and all this stuff. And so when we left there, unexplainably, kind of like you were saying, my wife and I had this sense, we're going to be involved in Ethiopia. And we didn't know what it meant. We just knew in our heart that someday we would. So these guys invite us to come to Ethiopia. We found out they're with the Orthodox, and we were living here at the time. We'd moved back with our kids to get them through high school. And when we heard that they were with the Orthodox, my wife looks at me and goes, we're in. We're going to go. So I was like, all right, we're coming. Got over there, and the door, was crazy wide open. The people who view us as heretics basically said, come and teach us, and we need to learn this stuff. And in the process, what happened was one of their guys wanted to come here to go to seminary and wanted us to help fund it. And we said, what if for the same price that it would cost one person to come to the U.S., what if we could bring seminary to you? What if we could do intensive classes and we could train 25 of you? It would cost about the same as it would for us to bring one to America. And they said that would be awesome. And so we ended up creating, for the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, a master's program in leadership and community development that gets approved by the patriarch, who at the time is not only the head of the 50 million Ethiopian Orthodox, but he's the head of the World Council of Churches. So next to the Pope, the biggest dude in Christendom, accredits the program, gives it his blessing, even though it's being run by people who a lot of the people think are heretics, and we end up launching this thing. And we're like, who are we? We're like a speck of dust on a dog running down the street, and God lets Bridges of Hope all of a sudden be involved in this crazy thing because of this model of development and the effectiveness and the power of it. We get pulled into this thing. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church traces their history to the book of Acts. So the Ethiopian eunuch who becomes a believer and brings the gospel to Ethiopia, that's when the Ethiopian Orthodox Church started. And anyway, long story short there, we've now taken 2 groups through the master's program. We just in July graduated the 2nd class, and our goal is in 2015 we'll begin a PhD program to create long-term in-country sustainability for them. And they are spreading, like I joke about, the students in that, and all, but they are strategically spreading this model of development throughout the entire nation. They have 500,000 clergy in Ethiopia. And these guys are systematically going out and training them in Che. There we don't use the E, we call it community health. We don't call it evangelism, we call it community health education, and we stick an O on the front, so it's OCHE, it's Orthodox Community Health Education. And we're seeing it now multiply like crazy. So anyway, that happened. Then we got invited to India. The Hindustan Bible Institute in Chennai has, they are in they have 5,000 churches that they have planted throughout all of India. It's one of the first indigenous mission organizations that started right when the British turned rule back over to Indians, and they're now spreading Che throughout there. We had a guy come down and see what was happening from the Congo, see what was happening in South Africa, and he's the head of a network of 1,600 churches in the Congo, and said, we need this in all 1,600 of our villages. And we tried to get in there, and the Congo's so messed up and everything that we eventually ended up bringing 9 people from the Congo to Goleta and train them in Che in Reno's church in Goleta. And our church was doing daily vacation Bible school, so we went down the street and trained them in Reno's church and sent them back, and they are now spreading this through the Congo, and they've already spread it into South Sudan. So what this is a model of empowerment that goes viral. And the closest thing, we tried to describe, they brought together all these organizations to talk about kind of the next phase of vision for this model of community development. And the World Wide Web is really the best illustration we could come up with for how this is going to work, because it was started by an organization called Medical Ambassadors, which was a medical branch of the mission organization Overseas Crusades. They hired, and it had become pretty much just focused on the physical. They hired as their new president a Campus Crusade for Christ guy. So you take a guy who's hardcore passionate about the gospel to the ends of the earth, you stick him in a medical mission organization, and he wove the two together. And so a lot of the material, if you go through the Che training and you get these lessons, you'll see that, if you're familiar with Crusade, there's a lot of Crusade stuff in there. There's a lot of, teaching people the, transferable principles and all this stuff. They realized that it was limiting to keep it in this group called Medical Ambassadors. And so they gathered all these people, they called it founders meetings, they had 5 of them around the world, and they said, we're giving Che to the body of Christ. And we're like, well, what does that mean? And they said, that's what we're here to figure out. And we said, well, who's going to run this? And they said, you guys are, that's what we're here to figure out. It was the funniest thing I'd ever been a part of, as far as every question that was asked just got parroted back to us as, that's what we're here to figure out. We've got to figure this out. How is this going to work? Bottom line is, the global Che network was designed, and Che is now a tool for the kingdom of God that is spreading virally. And that's why, like Bridges of Hope, we train people in it all the time. We're passing this on to other people. People in South Africa are training people in it. And basically, at its core, it's a model of holistic discipleship. Discipleship that addresses the whole need of the person, the whole need of a family, and the whole need of a community. And yeah, it's holistic discipleship. And I spent, one of the reasons that I think God had me wait to go to the mission field, when I was away from Christ. I'm the prodigal son. I came back to Christ when I was in high school, rededicated my life to Christ, and started on a journey of learning about discipleship. I was a biblical studies major at Biola. Big focus of mine was figuring out, what does discipleship look like? My master's program in theology, I focused on discipleship. And my doctoral program at Trinity was focused on discipleship. I've spent the majority of my adult life trying to figure discipleship out. I went through 1 week of Che training, and now I know what holistic discipleship looks like, and have seen it work in all these different places all around the world. And the cool thing is, when I go in and teach this, I do what I did with you today. I ask people questions, and they come up with the answers. And when I walk out of the room, nobody's sitting there going, wow, that guy knows a lot. People walk out of the room and go, wow, we know a lot. We have the Holy Spirit in us. We have the answers that God wants to work in and through us. We took the Word of God and unpacked it. The biblical lessons work the same way as this physical lesson. You give people scripture and then you ask questions. And the way that they're laid out is also really cool. It starts at the top of one of these lessons and it says, here's the objectives of the lesson. Here's the overview for the trainers. And then here's the method. And this talks about like the skit that I did. Here's how long it should take. Here's things that you want to draw out of people while they're answering the questions. If they, if you guys didn't draw stuff out, then I might throw out some extra stuff to kind of fill in gaps. If we had time to kind of dig into all this, we talk about how this is maybe different from other lessons and training that you've had in the past, in that, you're the ones that are bringing out the answers. The trainers get to know people's names. That's why when we did the drama, I was throwing out names and all that because you want to make it personal. You want to be able to have, people feel like they're a part of it. In the course of the training, again, that's why I don't stand. If I teach Che lessons, you want to sit. Why? Because you want to be on the same level as everyone else. Not be the instructor who's kind of, talking down, which again, in a just didactic teaching method, that's great. But in Che, you want to be drawing out answers from people. All right. How are we doing on time?
Yeah, you got like 15 minutes.
Okay, cool.
So,
Questions. I want to give you a chance if there's things you're wondering, or it doesn't just have to be about Che. It can also be related to South Africa. It can be related to...
I have a question.
Yeah.
How do we get trained?
Okay. If you go on the Global Che Network site, there will be... and actually, you can email me too. So I'm going to give you guys my email address. Dennis W. at bridgesworldwide.org. You can email me and I can get you connected in. You can go online to the Global Che Network and they'll list out the trainings. We may do a training here in Santa Barbara when we're back in January. We're not 100% sure on that right now. But there's trainings that happen all over the place. No, you have to physically go.
Cool.
Yeah.
Is there a headquarters or?
They're based in Phoenix, but the trainings happen all over the place. So yeah, you can go and, if you go online, there should be a list of them. If not, let me know and I can shoot a note to Terry, who's kind of the point person for all this stuff, and he can let us know.
And you said it's 3 to 5 days.
Yeah.
Is that an everyday, all day? Is
Yeah.
That, okay.
Yeah. It's
So
like
like a conference.
not if you get it from us. So the way we were trained, we just had to pay to get the trainers there, and the training was done for free. And so we passed that same thing on. A lot of people now charge for it, but it's not much. It's not much. And the reason, a lot of times what you're paying for is the lodging and the food. They'll do it at a conference center or something like that. But when Bridges does it, we never charge just because we were not charged and we want to give it away. So, yeah.
So then who supports this ministry? Do people donate and stuff, or?
Yeah, for the Global Che Network, I think they have people that just support them.
Yeah.
It's a super minimal, like it's 3 or 4 people that serve as kind of the point people. And then they view this as, again, it's like Bridges of Hope. We are a Che organization. We are supported partly through our own, we've got business and stuff that I run that helps support my wife and I, and then we have supporters as well. But we pass it on for free because, again, it was given to us for free. So, yeah,
really awesome.
It's just part of our ministry. Our staff in South Africa never charge for it. They give it away for free.
So is your home base South Africa? Are you always there, or where are you at all the time? What do you
We
call
lived
home?
there from 2003 to 2008. Our kids just hated it. It was killing them. So they really wanted to come finish high school back in Santa Barbara. So we moved back, got them all through high school. And my wife and I moved back earlier this year. So we're now living in South Africa again. The government has still not seen fit to give us a visa. So they're really messed up in they're changing their visa laws and all this stuff. And so anyway, we right now come back every 90 days because we have to. So, yeah. Yeah.
Isn't it one of those things where you just have to leave for a 24-hour period?
border hopping. I left for graduation in Ethiopia in July for 4 days, and they didn't renew my 90 days. And I went, normally it's just the border hopping they really like. If you go to,
Neighboring country.
yeah, Swaziland or whatever, they won't extend it. But now even going for 4 days to Ethiopia, they viewed that as border hopping, and they wouldn't renew mine. So yeah, they're really cracking down. So the nation has gone in the last 7 or 8 years from 43 to like 52 million, and they've got people dying, with AIDS. So it's a huge influx from around Africa trying to get into South Africa right now. Yeah. Other questions?
What are other signs? How do you know the difference when you cross from relief to development? What's the tell sign? You had the sign about the food thing, which
Yeah.
was interesting. Are there other things you look for?
Well, actually, Troy had mentioned last time when I taught this, he said to talk about Katrina. So when we were living in South Africa when Katrina happened, and when short-term teams would come over, the first thing we'd do is a river crossing. We'd show them the river crossing, and then we would ask them, where have you seen this? What are examples? Well, the examples that people used every time somebody would talk about Katrina, they would say, yeah, we'd send a team out to, work on people's homes, and, we work on their home, and then we'd go back, and they said a year later we'd come back, and they're sitting there. The home looks just like it did when we left a year before. And they said they expected us to do it for them. We weren't going teaching people how to fix up their own home. We were going and doing it for them. And when we came back, they're like, where have you been? Why has it been a year since we've seen you, So anytime that you see somebody just sitting around waiting for you to do something for them, you're in the quagmire of relief. Anytime you start getting complaining and entitlement stuff, not that somebody in development couldn't complain, but man, entitlement is just a telltale sign. It's when somebody's saying, I deserve this. How come you're not, and they're putting the onus on you. One of the things that we are just known for in the communities that we go to and we work in is that we don't give out money. And so people don't ask. And that's, for people that have done a lot of short-term mission trips, one of the things that blows them away is they're in the middle of an urban slum and people are not coming up to them and asking for stuff. And they'll ask us, why is that? And we said, because we have made it known that that is not who we are. Our DNA is in this community. And so if that changes and if people start having that expectation and hitting us up all the time, then you have to ask yourself, what have we done wrong? Where have we kind of wandered somehow back into relief? There's a bunch of things. A lot of it is you start recognizing dependence versus empowerment. And you just, it's so easy to slip into. It's so easy to do for people what they could do for themselves. One of our really cool success stories was when we started micro businesses, we took the kind of the best of the best thinking in the world on microfinance, on giving loans that will be repaid. And we thought, okay, well, that's empowerment. We're going to give people a loan, and then they're going to repay the loan, and then we'll use that money again to start a business. Well, we're teaching Che, we're teaching development and all this. We got some micro businesses started, and then in this community of Sweet Home, the church called Rock Harbor down in Orange County adopted the community of Sweet Home. Very gutsy mission leaders. They're the ones, we took them to 2 communities. I took them to Samora, and then I took them to Sweet Home, and they were going to pick which community they were going to adopt, sponsor. While we're sitting in the HIV support group in a shack in Sweet Home, it sounds like somebody's chucking rocks against the shack, and I'm like, that does not sound good. And then the guy who's with us bolts out of the room. What in the world is going on? And people were shooting. So we're in this like gang thing going down, and people are shooting, and the guy comes back, and then he runs off again. I'm sitting there thinking, I got to get this team out of here. And then the guy comes back and he goes, okay, well, somebody got shot, but don't worry, the people who did it are from Samora. I was like, oh no, like I'm never gonna see Rock Harbor again. They're here and like 200 yards away from us, people are getting shot, but don't worry, they're from the other community that we want you to adopt, So anyway, afterwards I sat with them and I was like, so what do you guys think? And they're like, we think we need to be in Sweet Home, because Sweet Home, man, that's where that was going down. I'm like, so that's where you want to minister? And they're like, yeah, that's where they need us. And I was like, all right, man, you guys are tough. So anyway, they're helping us. We're getting these micro businesses going, and it's a gnarly community. It's all shacks. It's about as bad a slum as you're going to find in that 3 million person, the bad area of that slum. We go in the second round of micro businesses that are kind of starting, and our national leaders, we turned it all over to national leaders in 4 years, which is the goal. You want them to be the ones that are doing it. So we now have trained them, and now they are training others, and then we just kind of walk alongside them. We're only out there 1 day a week. We go out, 1 day a week and talk to their community and kind of coach and encourage them and pray with them. Sasanda, who's our community development director out there, comes to us and we said, so, the micro businesses that are going to start, do they want us to have a loan for them? And she said, no. And we said, well, what do you mean? And she said, they said, we don't want to be dependent on a loan. We don't want outsiders to be the ones who fund our business. And we're like, really? And she said, yeah. And I said, well, what are they, because they wanted to start a sewing business. How are they going to get sewing machines? And she said, the ladies talked it through. They're going to sell fat cakes. It's kind of a South African version of a donut. And they put meat in them and stuff. And they're going to sell fat cakes. And they're going to earn the money to buy the sewing machines themselves. And so we're thinking, now that is cool. We have never again given a micro business loan. And that was years ago. Now, the funny part of that story was these ladies earned the money to buy their sewing machines. We're out there having a committee meeting with Sasanda, and Sasanda goes, the ladies decided instead of buying the sewing machines, they're so happy they've earned all this money, they want to have a huge party for the community. And they want to blow the whole wad on this big party. And we're like, okay, they can. It's their money, And we said, what did you say to them? And she said, I just asked them questions. She said, well, what's going to happen if you just have this huge party? And then what's going to happen with your business? And they said, oh, we'd have to start all over again. And she said, well, is there anything else you could do? And they said, we could have a little party. And she said, that's a really good idea. Why don't you have a little party? And then you'll still have money to buy sewing machines. But these ladies almost blew the whole wad on this community party because they'd never had that much money before, So anyway, so they have done that. Now at Ethiopia, we took our first team in Ethiopia, and we went out into the community, and it was a team from Salt Lake City, Utah, this church called K2 in Salt Lake City. And after we went to the community, the leaders, we met again with the HIV support group up there, and the ladies said, you've got to help us. And we said, what? They said, after you came to the community, our landlords came to us and they want to double our rent. Mm-hmm. And what we realized is we cannot go into these communities. When white skin shows up, they assume that we've given them money, and we haven't figured out a way yet for this to work. And so we're actually having to do all the stuff without us going out there into the communities because it's creating a huge problem. So they intended
consequences that you just don't think of.
Yeah. So I'll tell you one Ethiopia story. So these guys are the persecutors of the church. I took them through the second course that I taught was called Discipleship Counseling. And it's utilizing Neil Anderson's book, Victory Over the Darkness, Bondage Breaker, which is setting people spiritually free. And then there's a book that he wrote called The Core of Christianity that basically starts out in the very beginning of this book and says, in John 17, Jesus told us that he prayed in the garden before he died, he prayed that we would be one as he and the Father are one. Here's Jesus about to go to the cross. The thing that he prays is that the body of Christ would be one. And Neil said, for the last 2,000 years, we've been dividing. And it's time for us to come back together. This needs to be the generation. He gives this radical call. This needs to be the generation that comes back together, and that the core of Christianity has to stop being our religion and has to become Jesus. Well, I'm on the airplane flying back from Ethiopia reading the papers that they wrote on this book. And I am just like, I'm weeping. I'm in the middle. I got in the lucky seat. I'm in the middle of the row on a 747, the old one that's 2 seats on the outside in a row of 5. You're like stuck there in the middle and people are sleeping all around me. And I'm reading this. And these papers, these guys, these are professors in the theological college saying, I do not know how to explain what has happened to me, but when I was reading the book, it felt as though I was born like a baby all over again. And I'm realizing these guys are all getting converted, man. And so these Ethiopian Orthodox leaders are having these conversion experiences and Christ is setting them free. And I come back to teach the next class. I taught them the Che has actually 3 parts, the training of trainers part 1, then there's after you've started to implement, you do part 2, and then you do part 3. I come back to teach them part 2. And they want me to meet the people because their assignment for that class was they had to go through the steps to freedom in Christ in class. And it's these 7 steps that you pray through. And the first one begins with, committing your life to Christ. The assignment is then they go out and they find 2 people and they walk them through the steps to freedom. And I'm thinking these guys are going to pick soft targets. They're professors at a theological college. They're going to probably pick students in their classes or whatever. These guys are going out and finding prostitutes, and one guy found a murderer who had hacked his next door neighbor to death with an axe and had just gotten out of prison, who's all depressed. They found people who were, anorexic, and Ethiopia is an interesting country in that there's a lot of anorexic men. It's cultural to be skinny, and so people get eating disorders even though they don't have a lot of food. But anyway, it's all sorts of stuff going on. These guys went after all these hard targets. They want me to meet this one group of women who are HIV positive, some men, and I'm sitting in this room, and again, language is an issue. I'm through the translator, still struggling to understand things, and there's this one woman who is sitting there, and they start to tell her story, and they said, they sat with her, they prayed the first prayer, which is the prayer to commit her life to Jesus Christ, and said, in her something changed. They knew something changed. And then they walk her through the 7 steps, which is this process dealing with forgiveness and, releasing, all the counterfeits and all this stuff. And anyway, at the end, they could tell she was just full of God's Spirit, and she was paralyzed. So this woman was paralyzed when they're praying these prayers with her and everything. And at the end of walking her through the steps, the student asks her, would you be on our community health education committee? And when she said the word yes, she said, I felt something happen in my body. And then the guys, and this is Ethiopian Orthodox, very staid, very, when they clap like this. They're like, there's none of this going on. It's very, cultural to be kind of controlling all this stuff. And these guys go, yes, and so something happened in her and she is no longer paralyzed. And I'm like, hold it. She was paralyzed, and when you asked her to be on the committee, she's no longer paralyzed. And they're like, yes. And I'm like, oh my gosh, all these guys are like, yes, she is no longer paralyzed. And I'm like, can you stand up? And this little woman goes, and I'm like, oh my gosh. So anyway, these guys are like seeing healings, and it was just such a cool thing to watch.
And they're so nonchalant.
Yeah, I know, and they're like, yes, she was no longer paralyzed. But anyway, we've just seen, again, this is discipleship, and it's giving people the tools, and so they become the disciplers. They start looking at people differently. They look at a prostitute on the street and they think, child of God, just needs Jesus to break through their shell. And so what has happened is we've been taught a way to give people the tools to not have us be the one that's rescuing them, but to have God be the one who's meeting them. And that's what I want to spend the rest of my life doing. So do I have a couple minutes? Okay, one last thing I want to throw up. A couple years ago, I got invited to this thing called the Issachar Initiative. And the Issachar Initiative is actually, I think the biggest percentage is business people, but it's business people and Christian business people and ministry people who have wrestled through the fact that 2,000 years ago, Jesus told us to go into all the world and make disciples of all nations. And that here we sit 2,000 years later with a task. He only gave us one huge task, but why haven't we done this? And these guys, over the last decade, have really wrestled with the fact that this is doable. This should have already happened. Why do we have, almost 2,000 people groups that don't have the gospel? Why do we have, 1,400 or whatever languages that don't have a translation of the Bible? Wycliffe Bible translators came to a point a number of years ago. One of my buddies actually, this would have been my friend in college who would have been voted least likely of my big group of 15 guys that hung out twice a week and prayed together and stuff, least likely to be a missionary. The guy was a baseball player at Biola and became, when he graduated, a golf pro in Southern California. Sitting in church one day in Huntington Beach, missionary speaker comes, starts talking about Bible translation, and at the end, the guy's got a great sense of humor. He's actually a close-up magician, made his money during college doing close-up magic at Marie Callender's. He's sitting there in church. At the end of the service, he looks at Jolene and he goes, "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" And she goes, "If you're thinking we're selling everything and going to go somewhere and translate the Bible, I guess so." And so they sell it all. They move to Uganda. Move to Uganda, and they become Bible translators. They never end up translating anything in the Bible. They end up, because they're thinking outside the box and they're not, missionary type people, they're sitting there going, why are we translating this? We don't even know this language. Why don't we find people in this community who know the language? Think how much faster they could translate it. They helped shift the thinking of Wycliffe from the old traditional outsiders come in, learn a language, spend 25 years translating the Bible, to outsiders come in, find insiders who they can empower to translate the Bible. And Bible translation has skyrocketed. Doug comes back, gets hired by this group, or recruited by this group called the Seed Company. The Seed Company now has a vision to take every remaining people group that does not have the word and begin the translations. You ready for this? By 2025. Every remaining language that needs the Word of God, they're going to start the translations by 2025. This started about 5 years ago. They are ahead of schedule. It's going to cost, projected, $1 billion. They are ahead of schedule, and we are 11 years away from having the beginning, at least within maybe 15 years down the road, having every language on the earth having the Word of God. Issachar Initiative also has mapped out every remaining people group, and they are setting in motion that this is the generation that we're going to finish the task. You guys answered on your test today. What's got to happen before the end? Everybody's got to know, every people group. And we will potentially be the generation that sees that happen. And so anyway, what I want to tell you as you're in this missions class is that you are potentially a part of, and part of even the pushback. There's a massive pushback in the world right now. The evil that we're seeing that's increasing is, I believe, explainable by the fact that Satan is freaking out at the plans that the kingdom has. Because the kingdom of God intends to finish the task in our lifetime. And the kingdom of evil is absolutely terrified about what that means. And so I think what we're seeing around the world, and we're seeing it, man. I told you about Adwa, the guy who he and his brother Buntu were feeding their mom, and she was in the shack. He was murdered 2 months ago, shot in the head in his township. That's partly his fault. He'd kind of edged himself into a gang and then jumped out of the gang, and then the gang thought that he had reported some guys to the police. Where the most heinous evil came was, there's a tradition in the communities that we work in there where when someone dies, every night the family holds a gathering of people to come and comfort the family and to pray together. Those have been untouched. Those have been unscathed. The gang that killed him came on a Friday night. He was killed on Sunday night. Came on Friday night and sprayed the people that were there in that gathering with bullets and killed 4 more. His caregiver's son, Agnes, so I talked about, Agnes' son died. One of the other kids who was a part of that orphan support group, Malachi, died, and then Malachi's dad died. And somebody else died too. No, I'm sorry, Ottawa was the other one. So 4 total. The evil, the intensity of evil is increasing. And it's a sign, I believe, that we, again, this is worth investing your lives in. Like, this is worth investing your lives in being a part of the generation that's going to finish the task. So I encourage you. This is a tool. Jesus is the answer. Che is a tool. Che is a tool. The thing that Jesus has called us to is to worship him, as you read about this week, the glory of the story. Worship him, focus on him, but realize that one of the greatest things we could ever be a part of is what right now I believe this generation is going to own in a way that no generation in history ever has. And so keep your eyes open for that and consider what that would mean, whether God calls you to stay or whether God calls you to go. Man, it's exciting to be a part of this generation and to think that we get to be a part of, what could lead to us all being caught up in the clouds. So,
Amen.
Yeah. One other thing, if you end up going, there's a tool that we created called Buck for Good, BUCK4good.com. And it's a crowdfunding site that I had a physical dream about a couple of years ago that is helping people that are in mission organizations or people going to the field or whatever to raise funds through crowdfunding. So feel free to look that up, and if you email the thing on that site, it's coming to me. So, yeah. All right, let me pray for you guys.